everyone, welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from Lincoln Financial Field, getting set for the Eagles NFC Championship game against the Washington Commanders. EJ, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Olivia. It's a little bit different weather. It's a little bit drier, a little bit warmer than the last time we were here about a week ago. But yeah, no, I'm excited for the game. I'm excited for the show.
I'm sure the players are jazzed about that. No snow coming down from the sky this time around. A lot for the players to be excited about and a lot for us to discuss today. Before we get into our conversation, just as a reminder, we want you to be a part of it. Head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day if you're not already over there. Leave a question, leave a comment, whatever's on your mind. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll answer some of those questions toward the end of our show today. EJ, we've got a lot to discuss in terms of the health of both of these teams. Let's start with the Eagles with some breaking news from our colleague, Jeff McLean. Center Cam Jurgens is not going to play against the Commanders. He has been dealing with a back injury, did not practice on Thursday, was able to participate in a limited capacity on Friday. We just saw him out there on the field going through some warm-ups with the trainers, had a conversation with Howie Roseman, ultimately came off of the field. And then we saw Landon Dickerson snapping the ball alongside Mekhi Becton, Dickerson being the backup center, and of course Becton at right guard, and then Tyler Steen we're anticipating to see at left guard with Dickerson moving over to center. When you think about the potential impact with Cam Jurgens coming out of the lineup and having a backup makeshift offensive line in his place, what do you feel like the implications could potentially be in today's game?
Yeah, it's never ideal to have moving parts on the offensive line, especially this late in the season. Obviously Landon Dickerson played center in college. He had a couple of snaps at center earlier this season when Cam Jurgens went out against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Week 4. So we've seen it, a little bit. Obviously, again, he's got the experience doing it, but it's never ideal. We're going to get to some more of the injuries that might impact that interior offensive line, but I do in general think that even though like the Eagles have good depth there, Landon Dickerson has the experience, like I said, and then Tyler Steen is also, capable of playing left guard. We've seen him, kind of fill in at times playing guard and look pretty good. I still think it's going to be one of the bigger question marks at the beginning of the game to see how those moving parts might impact the Eagles offensive line.
Now, in for the Eagles, we are expecting to is pretty much we just got the inactives, and I just want to note that Cam Jurgens is not on the inactives list, so we'll see what exactly the deal is. Potentially, he could be backing up. We'll see what happens, but we certainly saw Landon Dickerson out there snapping the ball. But other than that, no big surprises on the inactives list. What we knew going into today's game already is that Jalen Hurts was going to be good to go for this game. He had sustained a knee injury against the Los Angeles Rams. He said during the week that he anticipates wearing a brace for today's game. So we'll see if that brace, he's wearing it, if it's visible. But regardless, it's good news for the Eagles that he's going to be able to get out there on the field. The big question is how mobile is Hurts going to be in this game? We know that his ability in the quarterback run game, whether that's on designed runs or by scrambling, improvisation, he has been quite the threat for them throughout his career, especially in recent weeks. You look back to that Rams game when he ripped off a big explosive rushing touchdown to get scoring going. If Hurts isn't as mobile as he typically is, how could that potentially impact the Eagles offense?
Yeah, I think it impacts both facets, both phases of the Eagles offense significantly. Obviously in the run game, him being +1 in the run game is it's a big deal for the Eagles offense, kind of holds that backside of the opposing defense and kind of keeps those guys honest. So, the run game gets affected. And then, honestly, the Eagles passing game has been disjointed for most of the year. It's been really reliant on Jalen Hurts' ability to create out of structure. So the fact that he might not be able to do that as much, it makes me, wonder what the passing game is going to look like. Is he going to be prioritizing getting the ball out more quickly, getting to his checkdowns more quickly? Honestly, maybe that would be a good thing at times for the Eagles passing game if he is, trying to operate more within the rhythm. But if those answers aren't there for him, which they haven't always been consistently throughout the season to this point, then I do wonder how the Eagles passing game will look if he isn't able to create out of structure. So like I said, I think it has an impact on both phases. I really do think that, the Eagles offensive scheme is kind of built around him being able to use his athleticism.
Absolutely, one of the keys to this Eagles potentially, their win, their demise in this game is going to be surrounding Hurts's health. Another good development for the Eagles is that Dallas Goedert is available to play after dealing with an ankle injury. Coming off of that Rams game, he did not participate in practice on Thursday and was able to be a full go on Friday. So again, good news there for the Eagles. Quinyon Mitchell was also someone that we had our eye on throughout the week after he injured his shoulder against the Rams. I spoke to him after the locker room that game, and he said he had no concerns long-term about his availability to go in this game. And lo and behold, he is able to play. He was able to practice all week long. So again, good news there for the Eagles on the injury front, especially when you think about who the Eagles are facing in this Commanders receiving core, specifically with Terry McLaurin, who has had a really incredible season with Jaden Daniels at the helm, having a really talented quarterback to throw the ball to him. When you look at the last two times the Eagles faced the Commanders, McLaurin had a quiet day, week 11, wasn't able to do very much. Mitchell had a big part of, he deserved a lot of the credit in locking him down, just one reception for 10 yards. And that reception did not come when Mitchell was in coverage. And then you look at week 16 and McLaurin certainly got his. He had 5 receptions for 60 yards and an explosive touchdown with Mitchell in coverage. The fact that Mitchell is out there and he is going to be facing off against this Commanders team for a third time, all eyes are going to be on that matchup between him and McLaurin. How do you feel about Mitchell's chances at being able to shut down McLaurin for a second time this season?
Yeah, I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. I feel like going back and watching that matchup in week 16 back, a lot of that production came on that explosive touchdown, as you mentioned. And I really think that was an uncharacteristic rep for Quinyon Mitchell. He's been so consistent all year. Not only has he been in good position a lot of the times when targeted, he's honestly taken, a lot of receivers out of games in terms of he hasn't been targeted very much. I feel like that game kind of started a stretch where he was tested more by, opposing offenses who tried to see if they could beat him deep. The touchdown he gave it to McLaurin, I think he was trying to wall off the inside. He was kind of sitting on an in-breaking route, and McLaurin took advantage of that and kind of beat him over the top. So I think in general, I feel like he is, he's capable of handling that matchup and, playing well against Terry McLaurin. I think that, again, that week 16 matchup, the word uncharacteristic is the one I really kind of left that tape feeling, is really that the secondary just did not look like it had for most of the season.
Mm-hmm. So the Eagles are not the only team banged up right now. The Commanders also dealing with some pretty significant injuries of their own, specifically to right guard Sam Cosmi. He tore his ACL last week against the Detroit Lions, so he is obviously inactive today. He will not be playing. Now, the big question is going to be, how is this offensive line for the Commanders going to adjust without him? They've got a couple potential options that they could go to. They could either throw in Trent Scott, a 7-year veteran, really a tackle, but he would be moving in at right guard, or they could potentially move their starting right tackle, Andrew Wiley, to right guard, and then slotting in Cornelius Lucas at right tackle. EJ, regardless of what the Commanders end up doing, how do you feel like the Eagles could, especially their defensive front, could potentially exploit the fact that they're going to be going up against not a 100% healthy and not the 100% best starting 5 combination for the Commanders?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I feel like, obviously, I said earlier, it's not ideal to have moving pieces on the interior offensive line for the Eagles. And I think especially with Sam Cosmi out, I feel like Sam Cosmi is one of maybe the 2 or 3 best guards in terms of performances against Jalen Carter this season. I think Chris Lindstrom deserves a mention there too. But, outside of Chris Lindstrom, I can't think of many interior offensive linemen that have done a better job against Jalen Carter, especially in that first matchup. So I think that's going to be really big. We've seen what Jalen Carter can do against overmatched interior offensive linemen. The Commanders didn't really have that problem in the first 2 matchups, and obviously they'll have that this Sunday. So a big opportunity for Jalen Carter first and foremost, or if they end up double teaming Jalen Carter or sliding the protection his way, could be a big day for Milton Williams or someone else in that defensive tackle rotation. So definitely a big loss for the Commanders.
On the other side of the trenches for the Commanders, defensive tackle Deron Payne is out. He is listed with both knee and finger injuries. However, this is the knee that is holding him out in today's game. Again, as you mentioned, EJ, it's these sorts of injuries are never good for these teams to be dealing with at this point in the season. When you look specifically at how this might impact the matchup against the Commanders defensive line going up against a makeshift, not makeshift might not be the right word, but a different Eagles offensive line than they're typically used to starting. How do you feel like the implications could shake out?
Yeah, I do. I wonder, based off that Week 16 matchup where, Washington did do a good job in the second half against the run. I know we'll talk about that later. I do wonder how much having Payne out, impacts their ability to combat the Eagles' run game. So I know we're going to talk about it later in the show, so I won't get too much into it. But yeah, I do think that's going to have a pretty big impact. He's a good player.
Let's transition into our latest headline segment. Lots of news and storylines going into today's game between two teams that are now going to be facing each other for a third time this season. And the entire season, all we've done is talk about Jaden Daniels and what an incredible rookie season he has had. He is the X factor of this Commanders offense. And this was truly a mind-blowing stat to me. According to Next Gen Stats, Daniels is the first rookie quarterback to have multiple playoff games with multiple passing touchdowns, and his 116.2 playoff passer rating is the best by a rookie quarterback in a postseason in NFL history. So he is only getting better and better since the Eagles last faced him in Week 16. And the Eagles are already well aware that he isn't just a passer. He is also incredibly dangerous on the ground. This season, Daniels scrambled to run on a league high 13% of his dropbacks. He generated 600 rushing yards on those scrambles, which is the second most by any quarterback since 2016. When you look at just the multifaceted way that Daniels is able to play, how he's able to gash you on the ground, how he is a deep threat as a passer as well, what is the key to limiting him all around today?
Yeah, specifically for Daniels, I feel like the key is pretty much the key for any elite quarterback, which is to get a pass rush without sending blitzes. We saw Vic Fangio blitz him more in the Week 16 matchup. He blitzed him on 20 of his 46 dropbacks. And honestly, like Daniels got the better of Vic Fangio's defense a lot of time against those blitzes. He was 11 for 19 for 178 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's 9.4 yards per attempt. So, I don't think that blitzing him was really the answer. I'm curious to see if Vic Fangio does still kind of have that stubbornness to sort of try to send extra rushers at him. I think it's important to mention, like, those extra rushers, it was usually only 1 or 2. It's not like he was sending massive blitzes at Jaden Daniels, but I think if they can get home with their 4-man rush, it gives them a chance. I think at the very least against quarterbacks like this, being able to send a 4-man rush, being able to cover things on the back end with numbers and then still get home, I think that is usually the formula for kind of slowing down quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels, but it's easier said than done. There's a reason that Vic Fangio wanted to blitz him in the Week 16 matchup. So it's a big if, but I think when you're dealing with a quarterback that's this hot and that is, this dominant during the stretch, I think that is kind of the formula, is you have to be able to win your matchups up front and have numbers on the back end to kind of combat what he's able to do in the passing game.
Mm-hmm. The Eagles need all hands on deck to try to slow down this Commanders offense, which means that they don't want to see any ejections today, like we saw in Week 16 when the Eagles last faced the Commanders. CJ Gardner-Johnson was ejected. We saw Jalen Carter incur an unnecessary roughness penalty in that game. This defense, it was a really interesting day for that team back in Week 16. They forced 5 turnovers, including an interception by CJ Gardner-Johnson, but then we saw some breakdowns in the secondary in the fourth quarter that ultimately led to a Commanders comeback victory, a 36-33 victory. When you're talking, EJ, this week to some of the players, I know that you wrote a great story over on Inquirer.com. I highly recommend that you check it out, about just this discipline and the conversation that this team has been having this week, going up against a Commanders team where there is some history, there is a little bit of beef. What has the tenor of that conversation been like, especially as they go into this game looking to play with a lot of passion, but also making sure that they don't cross the line?
Yeah, well, first, I appreciate your kind words. You also had a very good story about Darius Slay. I'm sure we'll touch on that later. But yeah, no, I feel like in this matchup, obviously, these are two teams that pride themselves on physicality. I think these are two teams, obviously, they played each other twice so far this season. So there are going to be heated moments. I think that there was a common thread in a lot of what the players talked about this week, which made me think it was, tied to something Nick Sirianni probably said earlier in the week, which is that the team has to come first. These guys said that they're focused on themselves. They're not focused on, whatever the Commander said. Obviously, Commanders defensive coordinator Joe Witt came out, said that the Commanders are planning on tackling Jalen Hurts like a running back. And I asked Jordan Mailata about that, whether there was a team reaction to that, if that, ruffled any feathers. And he said there was no team reaction. He said it was tactics. He says that he thinks that Witt was trying to get them off of their game and that talk is cheap. So I think that this is a team that's trying to bat away, some of the extracurricular stuff and try and focus on, I think the opportunity that they have to advance through the NFC Championship once again. So yeah, again, whenever you start hearing the players all say the same thing about prioritizing the team and focusing on themselves, I think that you can usually bet that that's been a message all week. And yeah, I do think it's something that needed to be addressed based off the way that Week 16 went, where they did have some trouble with that.
Absolutely. Let's flip it over to the other side of the ball with the Eagles offense. One of the keys to this game, as always, is to make sure that Saquon Barkley gets going early, often, and then continues to sustain that dominance into the second half of the game, which really has not been a problem for most of the season, except for that Week 16 game against the Commanders. Once Jalen Hurts went down with a concussion in the first quarter, we saw the Commanders defense start to play the Eagles run game a little bit differently, less more single high coverages and more loading up the box to stop Barkley. Barkley, he started that Week 16 game with 109 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on his first 7 carries, but then he was limited to just 41 rushing yards on his final 22 carries. Pretty staggering numbers there. Obviously, the key to these Eagles victories this season has been making sure that Barkley is dominant. How did the Eagles turn it around in this game and not fall to some of the same issues that they had back in Week 16?
Yeah, we've seen them succeed even against loaded boxes against certain teams this year. I mean, the Rams last week is a good example. I think that probably sticking with the run, as hard as that might be, especially if you go a whole half like they did last time without really being able to rely on it. I feel like there's 2 types of runs that the Eagles have kind of varied between, which is you're either going to have like the steady diet where it's going to be 4 or 5 yards and you're going to stay ahead of the sticks, or you're going to have 2 runs that maybe don't hit for anything, but then you're going to get an explosive out of it and you're going to break one for 60 or 70 yards. I feel like when teams load the box, you kind of have more of the latter. You have an opportunity to break off explosives because there aren't as many people on the second and really crucially the third level of a defense for Saquon Barkley to beat. Even if there is one deep safety, you usually would like Saquon Barkley's chances of breaking that tackle in the open field. So I think being able to be patient with the running game and kind of, depending on how the complexion of this game takes on, I feel like there is an opportunity for them, even if it does mean there are a couple of drives where they're a little bit more stagnant, to kind of stick with it and see if they can get an explosive. Because honestly, for a lot of the postseason, their run game has been a little bit more explosive than their passing game even has been. So I don't think it's something they can get away from, even if it might be frustrating at times.
No, absolutely not at all. All right, let us take some questions from some of you, everyone. Let's transition it over to the fan zone. Let's start with this comment here from 360 Guy. They say it sounds like Darius Slay has a great coaching career ahead of him. So for that alone, I hope he stays with Philly. All right. Well, Slay is, I thought this was a really interesting little factoid that I dug up earlier this week. The fact that Slay is the oldest cornerback to start in a conference championship game since 2011, when Charles Woodson was playing for the Green Bay Packers. Slay is one of just, I believe, 10 players 34 years old and up that starting at cornerback in a conference championship game. So he joins rare company and very talented company in Charles Woodson there in today's game. And he has continued to perform at a high level in this Eagles defense in his 12th NFL season. He says he doesn't want to play any more than 13. The big question, of course, is going to be whether or not he is going to play in Philly next year. This could potentially be his last home game in an Eagles uniform. EJ, when you think of Slay's legacy and kind of what he could potentially leave behind on this team, not only through his play, but also his mentorship of this young cornerbacks class that the Eagles have, specifically in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, how big of an impact do you feel like he has made on this organization in his 5 years here?
Well, first off, I want to commend the story you did. I thought it was a really good look into the last couple of years of his career, and also like a really good look into how he is in the locker room. I feel like you really took us into some of those conversations he has with people like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So great work by you. In terms of like his career and his legacy with the Eagles, I do think he's had maybe not the easiest circumstances at all times. I remember when they traded for him that I was skeptical about the idea that they were trading for a corner, that was a little bit further along in their career and not really sure what that would look like. And I think, he's had resurgent years, during his time with the Eagles. And he has, as you mentioned, he's become an important member, an important mentor for the secondary, a captain of this team. I think that, his kind of growing into that leadership role, I think he plays an important part of that leadership nucleus. Not every leader needs to be, somebody who's going to shout at guys and kind of be like sort of on the harder side of things. I think he sort of brings a lighter side to that. And I also think one thing that has always stood out about him is his willingness to help younger players. He's talked before about how when he was a young player, he benefited from people being willing to, bring him along. Obviously, you talked to Glover Quinn, who is one of those players for him. So, yeah, I think that it is an important legacy. I think it's an interesting, couple of years that he's had here where he has had to overcome some things. And I think really he's given them very consistent play. I'm old enough to remember when the Eagles did not have very consistent cornerback play. I remember times where they did not have a cornerback that was as, good as Darius Slay has been in the last couple of years. So, yeah, he's been an important player for this, last 4 or 5 years.
You also think about important players in Eagles' recent franchise history, and it's hard to not include Zach Ertz in that conversation. In this question here from Ace Pilot, they say that Zach Ertz is a class act all the way, and that they're sure that they're happy he's enjoying this resurgence in his career with the Washington Commanders. Won't be rooting for him on Sunday, though. I'm sure there are lots of Eagles fans who are also in Ace Pilot's company right now. But yes, Zach Ertz has had a lot of success this season with the Commanders at 34 years old himself as well. He had 7 touchdowns during the regular season, which is that's a stark growth over his recent production in recent years. When you think about also his legacy here with the Eagles and what he has been able to accomplish, playing a Super Bowl and now returning as a member of the opposing team in the NFC Championship game, like how crazy of an experience do you think this is for Zach Ertz?
Yeah, I remember in 2022 when there was all the talk about the core 4 with Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, and Brandon Graham. It's like Zach Ertz was kind of like the 5th member of that core 4 that got traded, midway through. I guess that was the 2021 season. So yeah, no, it's definitely, he's had a great career. I mean, he is but like, let's be clear. Like, he's still a really important player for this Commanders offense. He is, as almost about as effective as he's ever been in the red zone. He is an important member of the receiving core that Jaden Daniels has been so successful finding. So yeah, it is going to be an interesting thing. Obviously, he had the thing with Nick Sirianni after the Week 16 matchup, so I'm sure he will be up for this game. And he talked even after that, earlier in the season when he came back to the link, that it was an emotional experience for him coming back here on the wrong side of things. So I'm sure that'll only be amplified today. This is obviously the stakes are a lot higher today. Because you got to keep in mind he hasn't had the luxury. He wasn't on that 22 team that made it to the Super Bowl.
All right, everyone, let us transition into our player picks. We've discussed plenty of players that we're going to be keeping our eyes on in today's game, EJ. However, if you had to pick one that you are most eager to see how they perform, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert. We talked earlier about how the passing game has been disjointed at times, but really the steadying force, if there is one, has been Dallas Goedert in the postseason, really since he came back from injury. He's had 4 catches in each of the last 2 games. He had 56 yards against the Rams, and he has been an important part of that passing game, like I mentioned, especially if Jalen Hurts is going to be limited some in his ability to extend plays and get out of the pocket. I'm sure that Dallas Goedert will be an outlet for him at times, and I think that will be an important outlet, just because of the fact that he is able to create after the catch. He is able to sort of extend plays. We saw him with the stiff arms against the Green Bay Packers in the wild card round. So yeah, I obviously he dealt with the ankle injury, earlier in the week. So I'm curious to see how he looks when he comes out. And then if he is, close to 100%, which he seemed to indicate he was when he talked to us on Friday, then I think he will have a really important role in the passing game.
I'm going to pick someone on the other side of the ball. I'm going with Jalen Carter. We've already discussed how important of a player he has been to this Eagles defense, to this Eagles team all season long, but specifically last week against the Rams in the divisional round. Carter was, in my opinion, the MVP of the game. He is the reason that the Eagles are here in this NFC Championship game, because as the Rams were resurging and trying to make a comeback at the very end of the game, Carter came up with a huge sack on 3rd down, getting Stafford down, and then one more attempt on 4th down for the Rams, and Carter had, again, an important pressure that ultimately forced Matthew Stafford to throw the ball away. So the Eagles are going to need every bit of that talent out of Jalen Carter once more in today's game as they attempt to extend their postseason run and make it back to the Super Bowl potentially. All right, let us transition into our prediction segment. And as always, we are pleased to welcome in Jeff McLean to help us with his prediction as well. And also, as always, Jeff, we want to hear one of your matchups to watch. What are you most interested to see in this game in terms of a matchup between the Eagles and the Commanders?
Well, I think you got to put up there A.J. Brown versus Marshawn Lattimore, and that was one of the marquee matchups we saw last month when they faced up with the Commanders, basically having Lattimore follow A.J. around the field. A.J. made his share of catches. Marshawn had his share of moments as well. The Eagles lost, of course. And AJ has been struggling these last several games. He only has 3 catches for 24 yards in the playoffs. I don't think all that is on him, although I'd say last week's game, in which he had 2 drops, he would say it himself was probably the worst game he's had in quite some time. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the Commanders kind of employ that same tactic again this week. I would expect them to. As dangerous as Devontae Smith can be, AJ Brown is next level in my opinion, and he's the guy you want to take away from Jalen Hurts, because we all know how they play buddy ball, and if you could take AJ out of it at least a little bit, I'm sure that they'll cloud their coverage on AJ, and that's what we've seen teams do this offseason, and teams increasingly do to stop AJ Brown, is just to have a safety over top, not essentially doubling him, but in some forms accounting for him with an extra defender keeping eyes on him. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens. I think it will. And in terms of Devontae Smith, I mean, look, if AJ's going to see doubles, he's going to have to come up big and make plays versus whoever he's matched up against. The other cornerback on the other side of the ball, Mike Sainestill, he's a good cornerback. His numbers are very good. So I mean that's one of the strengths of this Commanders defense. That overall I don't think is very flashy. They don't have any really stud. They have some good guys. Lattimore, I guess, would be who you could label a stud. And they're going to be without the Deron Payne up front, but. AJ Brown versus Marshawn Lattimore could be something to watch, and a key reason why either team wins or loses this game.
With all things considered, from that matchup to just the sheer number of injuries both teams are dealing with, Jeff, what is your final score prediction for today's game?
Yeah, the Cam Jurgens thing throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into this for the Eagles. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that just he didn't practice much last week. And you saw mostly Landon Dickerson and Tyler Steen there, and I think they feel comfortable based upon that. But that being said, this is why the Eagles have the most depth in the NFL on the offensive line. They're prepared for these moments, and I don't think it's going to throw them off too much. It could. I don't think Jalen's ever received snaps from Dickerson at center in a game, so that could be a little bit of a quandary at times. And I'd be a little more concerned about Tyler Steen than I would Dickerson, who's one of the smartest guys in that offensive line room. I think he should be able to handle the protection calls and whatever else is thrown onto the center's shoulders. But overall, I just think the Eagles have more strength. They have strength up front, even with the injury to Cam Jurgens. I think that's going to go a long way against a Washington team that's playing a little bit with house money. I don't think that they expect to, they go into this game thinking that, we're a year from being Super Bowl contenders. But I think when you look at the roster, that's probably more the reality. So unless Jaden Daniels goes off, or if Jalen Hurts for the first time maybe all of the season makes some very uncharacteristic mistakes, I'm going with the Eagles, and I have them winning a relatively close one, a high-scoring one, 34-30.
All right, EJ, how do you see this one shaking out?
Yeah, I see it a lot the same way that Jeff does. I feel like the danger for the Eagles is just Jaden Daniels kind of being the trump card, the ultimate neutralizer that an elite quarterback can sometimes be, can sometimes serve to be. So, barring turnover luck, which I think the turnover flukiness was definitely a part of how the Commanders got here in the first place against the Lions. Maybe not flukiness, but the turnover differential was definitely a big part of that divisional round game as well. So, barring the unforeseen, I think the Eagles do have the talent advantages to be able to kind of squeeze this one out, like Jeff mentioned. The Cam Jurgens injury kind of makes this a little bit harder to figure out. But yeah, I had the Eagles winning 28-27. I think that this will be a closer game. I think this will be a heated game at times, but I think the Eagles, again, it's just hard to pick against them. They have found a way to just not lose so many of these games in the last couple of months that I think they'll be able to figure this one out, down the stretch.
Mm-hmm. EJ, I'm with you. I feel like the Eagles keep finding ways to win. They keep they keep it up. They're keeping it up, and it doesn't make any sense to pick against them just yet. I'm going with the Eagles 26-23, despite all the injury concerns, despite the questions surrounding Jalen Hurts' mobility. I am curious to see, even if he isn't able to run as much as he typically is, will the Commanders still honor him as a rushing threat? That's a big question that I have going into this game. But ultimately, the talent on this Eagles roster compared to the Commanders, I still feel like they have the better team on paper. The Commanders are playing like a really good team so far, but I feel like the Eagles truly have the talent advantage, the advantage of playing at home, the experience advantage as well. So with all of those things in mind, I'm going with the Eagles. A little bit more of a low-scoring game, just because some of these games have been a little bit more low-scoring for the Eagles recently. But we'll see how it all shakes out. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning into Inquirer Live at Gameday Central. Just as a reminder, you can head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day if you're not already over there. Make sure to chat with us throughout the game. We'll be over there answering your questions, interacting with all of you throughout the game in real time. So we look forward to seeing you over there.
And keep up with more Eagles coverage on my Uncovering the Birds podcast. New episodes released every week. Listen to wherever you get your podcasts or go to inquirer.com/podcasts.
That is all for today, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into Gameday Central, and we'll see you next time.